Support for the Brülosophy podcast comes from the following. Love to Brew is a national leader in homebrewing supplies, offering exclusive products such as East Coast yeast, TV taps, and Brülosophy recipe kits, all with free shipping on orders over $75. When you need brewing ingredients or equipment, check out Love to Brew at love2brew.com. The best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. Find everything from classics to modern favorites, as well as cool experimental varieties and a vast array of ingredients and gear at yakimavalleyhops.com. Hey everybody, I'm Marshall Schott.
I'm Ray Found.
And you're listening to the Brülosophy podcast. So over the last couple of months, we've been compiling a list of questions that we're going to answer today in the first of what we're calling our Brü A series, which is just kind of a stupid way of saying question and answer, really. For those of you who read the website, you probably took a survey about a month and a half, 2 months ago, where we asked for people to vote on all of these different ideas that we had, 4 or 5 different ideas we had for podcast content. And hands down, the most popular one was this question and answer series, our Brü A series. So we plan to release these episodes occasionally, basically whenever we get a list long enough that we can do an entire show on it. And that's today. We've got such a long list that we're going to have to split this one up into 2 episodes. So if you asked a question and it doesn't get answered on this episode, expect it to be answered on the next one, which we plan to pump out there in a couple of weeks. If you have any questions that you want answered on the Brülosophy podcast, you can email Marshall at brülosophy.com or ask your questions on any of the forums that we frequent. Nothing is off limits. We will answer pretty much anything within reason.
Well, and we don't want suggestions necessarily for experiment ideas. We can't do those live on air.
We do get a lot of suggestions for experiments, and we appreciate those. But if you're asking a question that you want answered on air, it has to be a question, not a suggestion.
We got to be able to collect data.
That's right. Well, hey, I want to congratulate our fellow contributor who, just last week, got married, Matt Del Fiacco. They officially got hitched last week. So I think they're out enjoying their honeymoon right now. Yeah,
he went somewhere in Europe, right? Somewhere where the pretty good beer scene?
Yeah, I have to imagine anywhere he went. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's going to Europe, but I'm sure it's more of a beercation. Well, a beercation honeymoon type of thing. But I certainly envy where he's at right now.
Yeah, no, that's going to be awesome for him.
Yeah, good. Congrats to Matt for getting married. He's making the move like most of us over here at Brülosophy already have. Well, hey, before we get into the questions for Brü A, I want to address an issue that's come up quite a bit actually over the last 4 or 5 months. People have been bringing it to my attention. I've actually witnessed it myself, and it has to do with the t-shirts that we sell on Amazon. Little background on the t-shirt thing. About 3 or so years ago, I was encouraged to start selling t-shirts on a platform called Teespring. What Teespring is basically is, or at least what it used to be it was like a time limited t-shirt sales thing where you'd start a campaign and set a 2 or 3 week time limit, and people could buy up all those shirts in that time frame. And then once the campaign was over, they distributed the shirts.
Yeah, it was great. They didn't manufacture them until there was a certain volume reached, almost like a Kickstarter project.
Yeah, and it's really cool. It's a really neat way for people to actually kind of profit a little bit off of t-shirt sales. Well, one of the issues is that we ended up making a couple designs that seemed to really catch the eye of people who wanted to copy them so that they can make a quick buck. And one of the more popular ones is the logo that's on our My Kind of Science t-shirt, which I actually happened to copyright recently because of all of these issues. We call that logo the Brütron. That's the neutron with all of the beer stuff on it. People don't seem to care about that, and in order for me to get people to stop using it, I have to find them. They don't come to me and ask if they can use it. And so what's been happening anyways lately is that I'm here, I get calls back or emails from people telling me that they bought our shirt and the one that they received didn't have, for example, the umlaut on the back, which is something that we do on all of our t-shirts, I think with one exception at one point. And that's one way that you can figure out if a shirt is ours, is it has the umlaut with our domain name, something somebody who's ripping us off isn't going to do, right? So I just wanted to kind of get out there that we know that this thing is happening and it's driving us nuts as well. If you want to buy a Brulosophy shirt, the only option you have right now is to go to Amazon.com and search for Brulosophy. The t-shirts will be sold by Brulosophy, and there is in the description, it actually says official apparel of Brulosophy. I mean, we've done everything we can to make it obvious, and I know how easy it is to miss that. Even walking around my relatively small community here in Fresno, I bumped into somebody who was wearing our Hop Beat t-shirt. And I was like, went up to him, gave him a high five and all that. And he turned around to walk away and there was no umlaut on the back. So, it's happening, and I get that. And if you're buying those shirts, you might save $1 or $2, but you're also not supporting Brulosophy. So just something to keep in mind. If you want to support us, you got to find the right t-shirts. That's the only way we're going to get any kickback from those sales. Now, one more quick issue before I move off of this whole t-shirt thing. There are certain people, it seems, or some people who have purchased the genuine shirts from our account, from our Amazon account in our Amazon store, who are receiving t-shirts that don't have the umlaut on the back. And it's causing them to wonder if maybe something else went awry. It didn't really, except for that Amazon didn't follow through with printing the umlaut on the back of the shirt, which is kind of a bummer because I pay a premium to have them print an image on both sides of the t-shirts. So they're keeping more of the money for doing less of the work, if that makes any sense. All of that to say that if you buy a shirt from our real, the real Brulosophy shirts from our account on Amazon.com and you don't have the umlaut on the back, contact Amazon. Do it for me because I don't want them keeping any more money than they need to be keeping, and you deserve a shirt that has the umlaut on the back. That's what we designed it for. So anyways, there's all of that. We are definitely looking into ways to take over more control of our t-shirt sales. One idea we've had is to work with pre-existing like online homebrew shops who would be willing to kind of manage the merchandising side of t-shirt sales and whatnot. We might even kind of move it all in-house, but I still have to work on my wife to turn our garage into a warehouse, but we'll see how that goes. I will be sure to announce whenever that happens. We do have an online store still, and for those of you who have visited the online store, you're probably very well aware that the selection is quite paltry at this point. In fact, I think all we have available right now are mesh back hats and stickers, which if you want those, head over to brulosophy.com/store. You can pick one up. We'll get them shipped out to you really quickly. They're really neat. The problem with loading up the store, like I said, is it requires a place to store all of this stuff. And that's kind of hard to come by when you live in the suburbs. So we're kind of working on different ways, trying to figure out exactly what we can offer out of my garage, basically. And then, like I said, working with other people out there to try to figure out a neat kind of merchandising setup. So anyways, there's a store. We're going to be slowly building it up and putting more stuff in there. Just keep your eyes on it. And I'll try to announce when we add new stuff.
I feel partly responsible on the Amazon deal because I think I was the one that pushed you to try and sell through there. And that would, hopefully fix some of the ripoffs that we were getting on Teespring. And it seemed to have only gotten worse.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it's worse. It's certainly about the same. What actually inspired me to give this whole talk here on the podcast today is somebody contacted me to thank me for the t-shirt that I put out on Teespring last week. And so we're not selling t-shirts on Teespring. So if you are looking anywhere other than Amazon in the Brulosophy store on Amazon, you're not buying a Brulosophy shirt. You're buying a shirt that some jerk put our logo on and is making money off of. So just a heads up, that's really all it is. If you're looking for ways to support Brulosophy, if you enjoy what we're doing here, you want us to keep doing it, you can head over to brulosophy.com/support, where you'll find a list of all of the different places that we have links to, that if you use them, we get a small kickback and it doesn't really affect your shopping experience at all. You can also head over to patreon.com/brulosophy to see the cool rewards you can get for committing to a regular contribution as low as $1 a month. In fact, we just early last week sent out the private, password protected link for Malcolm Fraser's award-winning California Common, which I've heard some people are already brewing. So
there's absolutely no chance a guy from Pennsylvania can make a good California beer.
I know. When's the Pennsylvania Common coming out?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we don't really have anything coming up in the future in terms of our event calendar. I'm definitely looking forward to hopefully being able to make it out to Hop Harvest again this year. I've been chatting with Jeff from Yakima Valley Hops, and we've been tossing around some fun ideas for some, kind of the fun stuff that we did in HomebrewCon, kind of repeating that again up in Yakima and seeing if we can't get a crowd out to their shop up there. Nothing set in stone yet. Again, I'll be sure to announce that. I'd love if we could get a couple of the Brulosophy folks out to Yakima this year for the harvest. It is such a blast, just such a fun time.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Any time spent in the Pacific Northwest is nice too.
Yeah, definitely. God, especially that time of year. It's beautiful. Well, for those of you who listened to the last episode of the podcast, you heard our new segment where a couple of my dorky friends reviewed Bell's Hop Slam Double IPA. And as cool as commercial beer reviews are, and as fun as this project is going to be, I had the brilliant idea just earlier this morning to expand the types of beers that Jersey and Tim are going to be reviewing. And so what I want to do is invite homebrewers to send us their beers so that you can have Jersey and Tim, completely impartially, of course, blindly review your beer and give you feedback on the Brulosophy podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. You got to be prepared. You got to have a backbone because these guys don't know what they're drinking. They'll never know until the end. But if you want your beer featured on the Brulosophy podcast on the 1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim, and so that you can receive the tremendous feedback that they're going to give you, shoot me an email at marshall@brulosophy.com. I'll accept any beer you want to send right now, and I'll have them review it. Just please don't send anything that's going to, that is like intentionally infected, so that they end up throwing up in my studio here. Yeah.
So you don't want me to bottle up some of the drippings out of my drip tray then?
Yeah, please don't do that. The beer reviewed for this episode truly is a dandy. I'll tell you what, I was really excited to be able to serve such a neat beer to my friends. Little backstory: I have a buddy in town, one of the better brewers I've met. He's won a million awards, just a fantastic brewer of beer. He recently had to stop drinking due to health issues, which is such a bummer, But he was not in good shape, and his doctor said, you're gonna have to drop the whole brewing and drinking thing. So he was selling off all of his equipment, and I saw that he was getting rid of a couple of CO2 tanks. And so he brought those over and I bought them from him. And as a gift, he also included a 2014 Sticky Monkey from Firestone Walker. This is what they call their Central Coast quad. I think it's like basically a Belgian quad, that back in 2014 was absolutely fantastic. Well, he's had this thing cellaring for 3 years now. And, rather than drink it myself or share it with friends who actually do care about this kind of stuff, I thought it only prudent to serve it to my neighbors.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. It's another dark beer.
It smells like a porter wine.
It smells like armpit, dude. I don't know what you're smelling.
It smells like this is very porterish.
How do you know what a porter is?
I know what a porter wine is.
I think you're referring to a port wine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
See?
Shut your face.
It's not portery. It's not a word.
I just made it up.
Well, if we're gonna say that it's make up things, then I think this smells like renewable energy.
It smells like Zen Alley porter wine.
I don't even want to taste it right now. I just want to keep smelling it.
I like this. Very good.
I'm blown away. It's not Miller Lite. You know that, right?
Yes. It's very good.
Oh, God. That's horrible.
No,
How
it's
do you
good.
like this? This isn't you.
This is totally me.
Who are you and what have you done with Tim? How do you like? You're lying.
I am not lying. I recognize this.
What do you mean? You've had this before?
Mm-hmm. Not just particularly, but I've had
Oh, God. It's
a port wine that tastes just like this, and it's delicious.
Let me get my thoughts congealed, and I will tell you what this tastes like. Imagine everything in a dumpster made into a liquid.
I like this. It's good.
I'm not kidding. That's disgusting.
Oh, this is delicious, Marshall.
Yeah, I actually think of the three, this is the one I will not be able to finish.
Really?
Yes. Well, you can finish it for me, Mr.
I will.
Hoity-toity Porter. It tastes like Jeeves. Fetch me some of that porter in beer. That's delicious.
It's very good.
Oh,
If I had a piece of chocolate, it would be
I don't know what
amazing.
it tastes like.
All right, when we come back, Ray and I answer your questions. Stick around. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste time chilling work, which is why I use cleverly designed immersion chillers from Jaded Brewing. After some bad experiences with counterflow and plate chillers, I began the search for a more efficient chilling solution and discovered Jaded. That was nearly 4 years ago, and to this day, I continue to rely on the King Cobra and the Hydra to chill my wort in record time without the setup or cleaning hassle of other chillers. If you're looking for a way to optimize your brew day, I can't recommend Jaded chillers enough. Go see what they have to offer at jadedbrewing.com and let them know Brewlosophy sent you. All right, let's just jump right into this thing and answer some questions. Ray, I figure you and I can go back and forth and ask them, and we'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. Let's do this.
Well, let's start then. We've got this one here from Tom in Minnesota, and he's interested in hearing what your experience is in brewing and kind of history before Brewlosophy, and what credentials, if any, other than what you've done on the hobby scale, do you bring to the thing. And he actually is generous enough to want to hear this information about the rest of the Brewlosophy crew as well.
Well, I will. Since he's asking me first, I guess I'll start with this one. I think, like most homebrewers, my credentials are wrapped up in the books that I've read. I've never done any formal training in brewing or anything like that. I have really no interest in ever being a professional brewer. That's not to say I don't have ideas for doing other things in the professional brewing world. But my passion. I started brewing back in 2000. Was January of 2003. Bought a typical extract kit and threw it together and just loved it and kind of never stopped. I went through a small hiatus when I was in graduate school. And I do have a PhD in clinical psychology, which probably influences more my interest in the perceptual side of what it is we do at Brewlosophy. And I do have some formal training in statistics, though not in the way a doctor of statistics actually has. I still rely on consulting with real statisticians when it comes to designing these or implementing the types of testing that we do and whatnot. But when in terms of brewing, I don't really have any. I can't say I have any credentials outside of tons of experience at this point and a curious mind.
Yeah, and I'd say I'm even less qualified. No real qualification to speak of. I'm a salesman by trade, a business major in college, just sort of a skeptic by nature and curious, like you mentioned.
The next question comes from Jason Smith. I'm not sure where he's from, but he actually has a 3-part question here. He asked, what's your current brewing process? Why is that where you've ended up? And are there any changes you're considering?
So I've, interestingly enough, sort of ended up just about where I started. Before I started brewing, I read and read and read and read, forum posts and everything else. And basically, before I even had my first piece of equipment, I had sort of gamed out in my mind how I was going to brew all grain, and that started on the kitchen with the boil kettle. Up on the stove, doubling as a hot liquor tank, the mash tun that would get the water and grains added to it sort of mid-level, and then I laudered out into a bucket. And then eventually would dump that back into the boil kettle once the sparge water was out. And I really haven't changed from that process at all. I've got much bigger kettles now, bigger mash tuns, 2 sets. I'm doing it in the garage and all that, but it's basically still the same sort of thing. I batch sparge. I go from boil kettle that doubles as a mash or as a hot liquor tank into my mash. Stir it up in there, batch sparge out, and lauder into buckets, which then go back into the boil kettle.
So and so my setup is basically the same as Ray's. In fact, I think we're the only two who are using the insulated stainless mash tuns. Mine are the infusion mash tuns from SS Brewtech, and I believe Ray has the Chapman insulated stainless mash tuns. So the only thing it sounds like we do differently is I'm pretty much exclusively no sparge these days. So I real quickly, what I'll do is I'll warm up my strike water to whatever it needs to be based on what Beersmith tells me. I transfer all of that over to my one of my mash tuns, a stainless mash tun. I let it preheat for about 5 minutes. I mash in when I'm at my strike temp, and then I do the whole entire batch, and I let it sit for about 40 minutes or so before collecting the wort in a bucket, just like Ray. And then I take that bucket and I pour the wort into my kettle, and I boil it just like anyone else. The only changes I think I'm considering, and I believe this question comes up again later, we may get into more detail, is the whole mash length thing. I'm pretty comfortable doing about a 35 to 40 minute mash now. The only thing that restricts me these days is if I'm doing a side-by-side mash, I do allow both to go for precisely the same time, only to eliminate that as a potential variable. Another question Jason asks is, what styles do you actually like brewing most? Because of our experiments tend to determine the style. He says often simple. The recipes are often simple to let the variables stand out. It's funny because I feel fortunate, I guess, because most of my favorite styles are simple. German Pilsner, Munich Helles, even like American style blonde ale, and some pale ale, stuff like that. So those are the ones I like brewing most because it's what I like drinking most, and they also tend to work out for the experiments.
Yeah, and I'm similar. I do like brewing some lagers and different things. I've really never brewed anything more than about probably 20 SRM. I'm just not fond of dark beers in general. But I brew mostly right now American ambers, IPAs, pale ales. I do a blonde ale that's probably more rightly called a pale ale, but
and this leads me into, you said amber ale, and you've got the last question Jason asked here is, what recipe are you most proud of? I know that you've got an amber ale that you're quite proud of. Yeah,
I Make America Amber Again amber ale is probably the one that took me the longest to get to a place I wanted. I had sort of a fictional American amber in my mind that I kept targeting and just never sort of reached until I kind of came up with that recipe, and it's basically stayed pat for 3 or 4 batches now. But I've had several beers kind of going down that path that weren't anything like what I wanted.
Yeah, I've yet to have that, and I absolutely plan to brew it soon, hopefully for an experiment as well. For people who want to brew that, just Google Make America Amber Again. One of the top results should be an article where Ray used that for an experiment, so go ahead and check it out. For me, I'm not sure I have a recipe that I'm too terribly proud of, only because I brew so many different beers, and I might go a year without brewing, my quote favorite recipe. But if there was one that I had to kind of stand by, it would probably be Tiny Bottom Pale Ale, only because it is such a simple beer to make. It kind of stemmed out of an accident, and it really is very delicious and unique. And it's not your typical, citrusy Cascade Bomb Pale Ale. It's the feature hop in it is Fuggles. And so that one took zero tweaking because I brewed it once. I loved it. I tried to tweak it 3 or 4 different times and I didn't like it as much. So I just went back to the accidental recipe I came up with, and I just stuck with it. All right, next question.
Okay, this is from TJ Hawkins. He's asking in regards to OG and finish volume of wort at the end of the boil prior to pitching. He says he recently switched from extract to brew in a bag, and it's been confusing for him. He's mashing with about 7.5 to 8 gallons of water, which seems like it should be adequate for a 5-gallon batch, but at the end of the boil, he's ending up with just about 3.5 gallons to 4.5 gallons of wort, and an overly high original gravity by 10 to 20 points sometimes, and he's just been diluting it down kind of after the boil with sterilized water. What do you think of his volumes there? Do you think he's doing something wrong?
So there is that's the first thing that stands out to me, because I'm assuming, I know that he also asks if he thinks that the dilution might be creating a problem, but I think his bigger issue is that he's not starting with enough brewing liquor in general. At least on for when I'm brewing a 5-gallon batch, my pre-boil volume of sweet wort is 7.5 to 8 gallons usually, depending on my boil off rate. And my boil off rate doesn't change very much depending on the season that we're in here. So I have to believe that he may not be starting with the proper amount of strike water, and that is why that would make sense then, as to why his OG is so high, 10 to 20 points higher, because he's actually starting with a gallon and a half less water, but using the grain amount. His grist is the same that it would be for a 1042 beer, just with less actual liquid. So that's my first, I guess what I wonder about first off is maybe he's just a little bit low on his starting brewing liquor.
Yeah, that's exactly my read on it too. I for a 5-gallon batch, am usually I have a really high boil off rate the way I brew. So if I'm brewing just a 5.5-gallon batch, I'm starting with usually over 8 gallons of wort, which probably means like 9.5 gallons or so into the mash tun.
Yeah, that's. I mean, my strike water, and like I said, I'm doing these no sparge bashes now. My full volume of brewing liquor now is pushing 9 gallons almost every batch, and even more for big IPAs and stuff like that.
Yeah, my kind of eyeball measurement for how much water I need to collect with my RO system before I can even consider starting a brew day is basically double my finished volume. So if I'm brewing, planning on brewing 20 gallons, say tomorrow, I figure I need to have at least right about 40 around, and that should leave enough to make some sanitizer or something if I need. But
right.
But yeah, I would recommend he check out some kind of calculator to figure this out that'll factor in the grain absorption rate. If you search for the Brewhead's batch sparge calculator, I'm really personally a fan of that. That's the one I use. It's just a standalone web tool, and it works really, really well for me. But I think all the tools are going to do something similar, very similar math.
Yeah. TJ, if you're listening, I'm going to echo Ray's suggestion. If you're not using a calculator or some sort of a design software, a recipe design tool, go snag something. I'm personally a big fan of Beersmith. I know there are multiple other calculators out there that you can use to accomplish a similar thing. If you end up going with something like Beersmith, all you have to do is head over to brulosophy.com and search Beersmith in our little search thing, and you'll see some tutorials on how to set up your equipment profile. And it sounds to me like that's really what you need to make sure that you're not. You can boil as aggressively as you want. You should not be coming in at 10 to 20 points higher than expected. So, I think that pretty much will probably solve his issues.
Yeah, use a calculator and then just adjust your values as you go. Take a stab in the dark that first time. You use it on what you want your starting volume and stuff to be, and then see where you come out. See if your pre-boil volume comes out wrong, your sparge comes out wrong, and then just tweak your inputs so that you get predictability.
Absolutely. TJ, good question, man. All right. This next question comes from a fellow by the name of Tom Barton, who, little side note, is the husband of Ann Barton, who I believe works for the publisher of The Idiot's Guide to Homebrewing, and was on that team, which I actually, it seems like it was so long ago, served as technical editor of. So Idiot's Guide to Homebrewing, check it out. It's a good book. Anyways, Tom asks, this is a good one. I'm gonna read this one in full because I don't want to miss anything. He says, I've got something that's been bugging me about the concepts of oxidation, a big issue right now, right? And how it's discussed mostly in regard to, but not limited to, hop flavors. In essence, the notion that oxygen pre-fermentation is great and should be incorporated with concern, but once yeast goes in, even a tiny bit of oxygen is somehow able to ruin barrels of beer without recourse. presents a giant flaw in logic. This makes no sense to me. Hops and their oils, they're present even during a Whirlpool hop stand. Yet people saturate their wort with O2 and don't even think twice about it. So what's happening during fermentation that's so damn special as to make oxygen so especially important to avoid? Is it biotransformation? Is it a byproduct of fermentation? I'm careful not to incorporate too much oxygen exposure after fermentation, but I don't handle it like a pyrophoric, which I had to Google, by the way, and have never had an issue. Hell, I've even forgotten to release the PRV on kegs of fresh IPA while carbing, for which I didn't take any precautions towards O2 exclusion, and I've never had an issue. So what am I missing? Ray, what is Tom missing here?
I don't know that any of us have the answer to that question. I think there's a lot of discussion about it that certainly sounds very authoritative, but he brings up a really interesting flaw in the logic that, whatever's happening, all those hop products, all those compounds are present the whole time, and if oxygen is problematic, then it should be problematic the whole time and not just in certain things. I know part of the hypothesis here would be that the yeast are going to uptake, preferentially uptake that oxygen, and it's not going to, have the opportunity to react with, some of the other compounds in the beer. But I don't know, and I don't know that anybody. I think the science is still pretty young on a lot of this.
Yeah, it does seem to be that what we know about oxidation and oxygen is that it's real. It occurs on some level. I don't think we're I don't know how to be too equivocal about this. I don't think we as brewers, at least, are what we think we know about the impact oxidation has on beer is necessarily as certain as at least that I used to think it was. We've done a lot of experimentation with oxidation at kegging and these different things with oxygen and whatnot, and it's just making me more and more confused. Like you, I think the best response is I honestly have no clue, but I wanted to include this question because one, he spent a lot of time asking it here, and two, because I think it does kind of spur thinking, the thought process. And I know we've got plenty of other experiments planned to continue kind of going down this path of learning more about oxidation. And just for those who are curious, pyrophoric is that basically means like spontaneously combustible. It's like a substance that just kind of combusts.
Like a hypergolic fuel in a rocket.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's not handling it like something that's just going to blow up out of nowhere.
Cool. Well, I know, like, anecdotally, I've had a few times where I had an issue with a keg or something go sideways when I was kegging, and I've always kind of panicked and would write on that keg that like something was wonky when I kegged this, or I had to restart the siphon a bunch of times or whatever it was, and I always worry that there's going to be some issue with it. But I just finished off a keg of a hoppy blonde ale that was where I had written this, and I went from one keg to the next and could not tell a difference at all. I know some of you guys have mishandled beers deliberately, including hoppy styles, and not been able to kind of trigger a differentiation
or the expected kind of effect from oxidation. I mean, but it, again, my response to this is, Tom, I have no clue. I do believe oxidation is real. I'm not so sure that the impact it has from a sensory perspective, at least, including appearance, by the way, is really, I don't think I know as much about it as I used to think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We'd go round and round in circles and end up with I don't know.
Exactly. Well, we got a couple more questions before we take our break. This one comes from Gregory Horowitz in South Windsor, Connecticut.
Yep. He says, because of an interesting article you wrote about the Ventmatics, he purchased one too. And he said he had trouble getting it delivered in a timely manner. My question, he says, is, do you still have the same opinion of them when you wrote the article? You talked about its ability to pour a beer with a beautiful head. Do you still think it's praiseworthy?
Okay, so we've been doing Brulosophy now since early 2014. Hasn't been too long, but we've pumped a lot of stuff out there into the beer world, and this of all things is the one that left me the most anxious, I guess, and the most frustrated. Ventmatic. The story is a long one, but in essence, I basically started chatting with the owner of Ventmatic Taps, and they're kind of an old company with a interesting history. We were chatting. He said he'd like to send me some of his faucets so that I could review them, and I did the review. The review was 100% true. The faucets were incredible. I loved them. They're much better than the ones I had on before that. I ended up using them for 2.5 years, not a single leak. The problem is with, I guess you could call it customer service and availability. I started hearing from people who were buying faucets from Ventmatic, and they obviously weren't of the same quality that mine were. They were coming with chips, and revealing that they weren't made with stainless steel as the ones I was using were, and the ones people expected to be purchasing for their money. It was very frustrating. And then all of a sudden, Ventmatic seems to fall off the map, and they're not responding to my emails. I have to add a little blurb to the review article saying, hey, I understand there's issues with this. Be careful. And then ultimately, I ended up hooking up with the folks from Intertap who were making how should I say this? They were making faucets that looked quite similar to those from Ventmatic. Well, after hearing a little bit of rumors going around, I decided to work with More Beer to review the Intertap faucets, and in my experience, they're basically the same as the Ventmatic. Now, I'm not going to get into the stories behind that and start throwing rumors around, but do I still think the Ventmatic faucets are praiseworthy? Absolutely. Do I think the company is praiseworthy? Ventmatic? I'm going to just come out and say no. I feel like a praiseworthy company has to be responsive. They have to care about their customers, and that didn't seem to be the case. I don't know what they're up to today. I'm not sure if they're selling faucets anymore. I've disconnected kind of myself from that. If you're going to get faucets from them and they're the same as the ones I got, I think you'll be happy with them. Hopefully that answers the question without me being too inflammatory. All right, next question comes from Reddit. It comes from user, I think I'm going to Causer. And this person asks, in your view, how does the difference between lower and higher FG compare to the dry-sweet dynamic of sulfates versus chlorides in water treatment? So just to kind of distill this, lower and higher FG, dry-sweet dynamic, sulfates, chlorides. Take it away, Ray.
He did ask, in your view, which I'm going to translate into, in my experience, only one of those seems to matter. The final gravity, all things being equal, doesn't seem to generate sweetness. That's in beers that are fully attenuated. Now, sometimes you have a beer and it tastes sweet, but it tastes like unattenuated or incomplete attenuation. That to me is different than just a higher final gravity from a same wort but different mash temperatures or something like that, which we've experienced. But sulfates versus chlorides, wow, I can't describe how striking that can be.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. In my experience, to go with the FG thing, there are two main reasons that you're going to get higher finishing gravity that I can come up with. One of them is you started with a really high mash temp, right? Which is going to increase dextrins, which I'm coming to the conclusion aren't perceptibly sweet, right? So you've got this dextrinous wort that's not going to ferment very low, regardless of the yeast you use. So you're going to have a higher finishing gravity compared to if you had mashed lower, right? The other way that you can have a high FG, and this one would be an unexpected way, is, for example, if your yeast stalls out on you. And in that case, you're going to still have, it's not just dextrins that are in there, but you've got maltose and the other stuff that makes up sweet wort, and it does contribute to sweetness. Yeah.
Or potentially even just different yeast strains. You could have two yeast strains that would be perceived differently and attenuate differently, and then that might very well line up with final gravity differences.
Absolutely. And so I think the whole dry sweet thing, I think we need, at least in my mind, I need to, and I have sort of divorced the idea of the dry sweet dynamic being necessarily a function of finishing gravity. Because I've had, I think a perfect example is if you go out, there are, what is it? Lagunitas IPA. I think it finishes at like 1020 or something like that. Sure enough, it's 1020, but you drink it and it doesn't taste sweet. It has that characteristic dryness that you expect in an IPA, which to me does seem, again, based on my experience here, does seem to be a function of water chemistry, and in particular, that sulfate content. You taste some of the most popular any IPAs out there right now, these hazy IPAs that people are making, which are kind of known for having high chloride water, and they don't have that characteristic dryness that I get in a standard or West Coast or whatever clear IPA. And so to me, it does seem like that the sulfate versus chlorides might be more linked with the dry sweet, or the impression of dryness and sweetness, perhaps more than FG.
Yeah, and you can do this in the glass. I mean, it's not perfect, but if you want to just try, adding a little gypsum to a beer in the glass. Now you got to add it to just a little bit of beer first to get it dissolved, so it doesn't just foam like a madman. But you can taste it.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kaiser, for the question. That was a good one. Next one comes from Jason Phillips.
Yeah, this one, he says, when you fine with gelatin, do you cool it first? What temperature do you cool it to? Do you dump it in? Do you stir it? And when you cold crash, how long does it take?
This is an easy one. I think Ray, you and I do it the same, so we can condense this one down pretty quickly. No, I don't cool. I don't cool the gelatin at all. In fact, all I do is I take hot water. I pour in, the what is it, a quarter cup. I take a half a teaspoon of gelatin powder. I toss it in. I take hot water right out of my tap, put it in there, and I toss it in the microwave for 20 seconds. After 20 seconds, I stir that a little bit. And then if not all the gelatin is dissolved, I'll go another 10 seconds, stir it again until it's all dissolved. And I'll do 10-second blips until all of the gelatin's dissolved. I take that super hot, not quite boiling, but still pretty hot gelatin solution. I dump that directly into my beer that has been cold crashing for about 18 hours. At minimum, I'll usually when I reduce the temperature of my beer for a cold crash, I'm usually adding gelatin between 12 and 18 hours later, and then I'll let it sit another 24 hours just because I want to be able to keg clear beer. I know Jake, I believe, tends to gelatin fine in the keg, or he does that often. And that works well too. You just you realize you're going to be pulling off a lot of that sludge at the end, or when you start pouring that beer once it's carbonated. So as long as you're okay with that, you can do it in your keg as well. I've done it too. It works totally fine. Yeah, my typical cold crash, I don't know, 2 days max, 2-3 days max, unless I forget there's a beer in my chamber.
Yep, I'm very similar.
Cool. All right. Well, that's our first set of questions. We've got more. I know this has taken a while. We didn't realize there was going to be so many questions. We got more when we come back from this break. If, like me, you prefer the simpler side of brewing beer, you have got to check out the Brü Bag, a food-safe fabric filter that allows for mashing of the finest crushed grain without risking the dreaded stuck sparge. I've been recommending these things since I started using them. They are awesome. The Brü Bag offers the only completely reinforced fabric filter for brewing that can be used over 100 times and comes in sizes that fit most mash tuns, or you can even have one custom made. Go check the Brü Bag out at brewinabag.com and be sure to use promo code TBP17 to get 10% off your order of $30 or more. All right, let's jump right back into these questions. This one comes from Rafael Lopez, and it was over Facebook. I'm pretty sure this is an international home brewer, and so I may mess up a little bit what he wrote here, but let's go ahead and ask it. So in the impact of flaked oats experiment, so the flaked oat, we did a New England IPA where we compared flaked oats versus just a grist full of, I think it was Maris Otter. He says that the batch with the oats had a target mash temperature of 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Despite the change of color, the results were pretty disappointing when it comes to mouthfeel. And by disappointing, I mean it was a non-significant result, so people couldn't tell the beer with the oats, 18% oats, apart from the beer that didn't have the oats. Okay. Even though Marshall, that's me, started, let's see, the text with a brief explanation about how flaked oats already have been gelatinized by pressure and heat during the flaking process. Do you guys think that could have been, the results could have been different had we mashed I think what he's asking is if we had done a cereal mash on the flaked oats before adding them to the mash, would the results had been any different?
Maybe, but we don't have data on that.
Yeah, I also just don't think it would be different. I've done cereal mashes in the past, and I mean, there's some, I forget who just said it recently I think it was in a podcast, that even like non-gelatinized or non-flaked oats and other grains may not even necessarily require a cereal mash. So Raphael, I really don't know. That's something we could put on our list of experiments to play around with in the future, though. Thanks
it does seem like a little bit of sort of like special pleading sometimes on, not necessarily, I don't mean to call Raphael out like that, but, if we were to presume that there's some mechanism by which we can get something to matter, so to speak, then it matters. And the reality is that most brewers are not, in my experience, taking special steps to try and extract something from oats, yet oats are broadly characterized as generating this mouthfeel impact. So,
yeah.
It seems like sort of cheating in a way. Okay. So this one's from Brendan on Facebook. And he says, since starting Brewosophy, have you changed any methods in your process permanently? And have any of those specific changes made significant improvements to your beer?
Well, the one thing I do far more often these days as a direct result of the experiments, is that I do, and people hate this, I do ferment the large majority of my lagers these days with a clean, traditional lager strain at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. And to say that has had an improvement in my beer, I'm not so sure, but I certainly like it enough to keep doing it. And the experiments that we're doing seem to suggest that it doesn't really have a noticeable impact compared to beers fermented cool. So that's the only thing I can think of. I did mention earlier that I don't mash for a full 60 minutes a lot of the time. That I don't know if that's a huge, it hasn't improved my beer, but it also hasn't seemed to have a negative impact on it. So.
Yeah, I think the only one for me that I would say is maybe an improvement. Maybe a couple. I think I do pay more attention today to water chemistry than I did before.
Good point.
I sort of originally was in the maybe it matters a little bit, but kind of get it in the ballpark and it's fine. But now for me, it's actually one of the first things it's one of the first dials I will reach to adjust a recipe. If I brew a beer and I say, I want this to be a little bit, drier or sweeter or, however you characterize it, water chemistry certainly, I'm much more likely to do that than, say, adjust my mash temperature or something like that.
Yeah, right. Couldn't agree more with you on that one, actually.
And then the other one for me is since I did the experiment on dry hopping rates, I'm dry hop more. I do like that kind of ounce per gallon dry hop rate, which is probably 50 or 60% more than I was doing before.
Yeah, that's a lot more. Geez. Good. That's interesting. It actually, I sometimes wonder about, with all the other Brewosophy guys, what changes they've made, if any, just in their kind of what they do when they're just brewing beers for themselves, and if there's any improvements. Thanks for the question, Brendan. That was a good one. Next up, we've got a question from Brian Carger, and he asks, what are your thoughts on trends in brewing equipment, especially the future of electric home brewing equipment? Thinking about transitioning, and of course, I don't want to spend money on something that doesn't work or is difficult to work with. Ray, have you used any of these newfangled kind of I think most of them are electric, but these kind of all-in-one brewing systems?
I live in Southern California, and our electricity is really expensive, and our natural gas is almost free. And so, no matter how much I brew in a month, I can't change the gas bill. But our electric bill, this month, is probably it's probably going to be over $600 already. I don't need to add any to that.
Yeah, right. So I've had the joy of brewing on a Grainfather when I was over in New Zealand. I've only done it once, but I got to talk to people over there. Brewing on a Grainfather is almost as popular as something like batch sparge brewing here in the U.S. It seems everybody has one and everybody uses them. And I got to be honest, the experience was quite pleasant. It's very easy. It's very intuitive. I mean, it's all digital. There are a few things, like if you were just to buy a Grainfather, it's designed for a 5-gallon batch boil, right? So that means you still have to sparge. Well, in order to get your sparge water hot enough, unless, you're sparging with cool water, which we've shown in an experiment doesn't seem to have a huge impact, at least. You have to have something to get that sparge water hot as well. And so, there are some trade-offs and whatnot. Matt Del Fiacco has one of the Brow Supply Unibrow systems. He absolutely loves it. He's been brewing with that for the last couple of months. And you can go check that review out on brewlosophy.com if you like. I know he's enjoying that one. Let's see. There are some other ones. Obviously, there's the Pico Brew folks who are making the smaller batch systems, kind of the countertop. People refer to them as the Keurig of brewing. And I've had a couple of beers made by both the Zymatic and the Pico that have come out great. I've had some from all of these systems that haven't come out so great. So I really think that if you invest in one of these machines, know what you're getting into. You are spending a premium for a very techie product, but that if you invest the time to understand it and learn how to use it, I think it's great. And if it meets your needs, that's really what matters.
Yeah.
All right. Next question comes from Daniel, the Mad Nad.
Yeah, he wants to say that he loves the show, which,
Woohoo.
Hey, we love that. That's automatic on-the-air question right there.
Yeah.
And he says he would like to discover more regarding the New England IPA and its juiciness and haziness, quote unquote. Do we have any more experiments to help us understand what makes the NE IPA so special?
Okay. I don't know what you've been thinking about in terms of NE IPA, Ray, but I've got some ideas here. I'm going to try to keep this relatively short. First off, this has been said before. I'm not the first one to come up with this idea. But if your goal in producing an NE IPA, this is going to sound judgy, and I don't mean to do that. If the goal is to impart haziness, and that's what you're looking for, honestly, make any beer you want and then dip your glass into the fermenter and drink it. Because that's the easiest way to get a hazy beer, is just cut it off before it's done. Now, if your goal is to produce a, quote, juicy, good example of a New England style IPA, to me, the haze in those styles is secondary to process. Now, I'm not certain what the haze, what's causing that haze necessarily. What I've come to based on the experiments that we've done and my conversations with dudes like Scott Janisch and Mike Tonsmeyer, two guys who are kind of at the forefront, as well as Ed Coffey and Brian Hall, guys who are at the forefront of the homebrewing NE IPA craze, in my opinion. It seems like there's kind of this, this kind of group of things that seems to impart this haze. And it's not yeast in suspension. All craft beer that's non-filtered is going to have yeast in suspension. Okay. They can still be crystal clear. There's still going to be yeast in suspension. So people who are claiming that they plated up any IPA and there was yeast in there, that's not terribly mind-blowing to me. So to me, what it seems like is that you've got the combination of yeast biotransformation of the hop oils. And so, and that's the whole citronellol being converted, linalool being converted into citronellol from biotransformation by adding the dry hop charge during high krausen, or even a little bit earlier than that. And what's happening there is that it's leaving behind these residual polyphenols, hop polyphenols, which again, you can make a West Coast style IPA or a clear IPA that's slightly hazy because you just over dry hopped it. And there's no amount of fining that's going to take that out. So I think that's a big part of it and that's kind of those things. It's the type of yeast you're using. Does it have the capacity to biotransform the oils from the types of hop that you're using, and then the amount of hops that you're using, and when you actually add those dry hops to the beer? You notice none of that we cut the fermentation off early and there was a bunch of yeast in suspension. You can make these beers with, you look at something like 013 or 1318. I've made a crystal clear golden, British golden with 1318 and it was gorgeous. Fined with gelatin. It was absolutely bright, stunning beer. I find a Northeast or New England style IPA with the same yeast, but doing this different process, and you couldn't see your fingers through the other side of the glass. So I'm not convinced that it's just yeast in suspension, or if that's even an issue with any IPA at all, actually.
Yeah, I think there's certainly something to just, quite frankly, really high dry hop rates. I've seen in beers I've done that heavily dry hopped beers have a sort of persistence to haze that beers that weren't dry hopped or that were just very lightly dry hopped do that. So I think there is something going on there. Maybe a yeast interaction is part of it as well. Yeah. But I do sort of contend that I don't think that there's a link between the haze and the juice. I think that's two. I think that those are two sort of different animals.
Do you think that the haze, it kind of biases people's minds because it makes the beer look more like juice?
Yeah, I think it certainly lends to that description because of that. It looks like, it looks like juice at breakfast sometimes. Yeah. But my experience is that you can make crystal clear beers that are juicy all the same.
Right.
Certainly, even my Mac IPA can come out, brilliantly crystal clear, and it's as fruity and juicy, as anything else I've had. The what was it? I had a Sierra Nevada, their Tropical Torpedo. I had a really nice fresh bottle of their Tropical Torpedo the other day, and it was like incredibly fruit forward.
Absolutely. That beer is fantastic when it's fresh, by the way. And that comes from somebody who's not like a diehard Sierra Nevada fan. But I got the same impression. It was very, to use that term, juicy, without being hazy in the slightest. And yeah. I don't think, haziness is fine. I'm not here to judge what you find beautiful in a beer. I couldn't care less. But when your impetus in brewing a New England style IPA is just to have a hazy beer or to have it look like mud. I mean, there are some commercial beers out there that I'm embarrassed to look at pictures of, because it just seems like process error and not actual, good. I don't know. It's not like they're making a good attempt at making a good beer. They're just riffing off of this whole hazy thing, and it's kind of gross to me. But anyways, moving on. Danny, by the way, I want to get this out there. I'm not judging people who like hazy beer. Couldn't care less. Whatever. Do your thing. I'm just, my thing has to do with this link between quote juicy and hazy, and I'm with you, Ray. I don't think they're necessarily married.
Yeah, I think they're probably independent factors, not they happen to coincide, but I don't think they're hitched together.
Yep, and we do have more experiments planned. In fact, I'll be brewing one of them soon, so stay tuned. It's going to be a good one. All right, next question comes from Chandler. He asks, "What's the best beer you've ever made, and what's the recipe?"
I don't know. Best beer. I was talking, I think, with you guys on this the other day on our kind of group chat there, and I'm actually drinking a pint of it now. I was having IPA earlier. I'm having a pint of my, I've called it the 6-pint Citra Amarillo Blonde Ale, and it's not the best beer. It's not the most impressive beer that I've ever brewed or had,
but it's in your hand, and that makes it the best, right?
But it's in my hand, and there's probably few beers I've ever had that it's like this is like the Lay's potato chip of beer for me. It's like you just cannot have just one.
Yeah, that's a great analogy of a good blonde ale, man.
And I'm just crushing every time I open the faucet. I end up pouring 6 pints that night. Hell
yeah. Let's see, best beer I've ever made. The one of the most memorable beers. I don't even know if I've ever made it twice. I tend to do that a lot. Is brew a recipe once and then move on. There was a beer that I believe I took it on. It was my first appearance on the Brewing Network's Dr. Homebrew show. And it was a Pilsner that was fermented with WLP 029 and hopped purely with Tettnanger. And I don't know if it was just the recipe was good or if it was a really just quality batch of Tettnanger hops. But my goodness, that beer was delicious. It tasted like it. I mean, it took me back, and I don't care what people can scoff all they want. It took me back to my time hanging out in Munich and drinking all of the Pilsner over there. And Yeah, I just had that. That's one of those memorable beers for me that I always tell myself I'm going to return to, and just haven't yet. So the recipe on that, you can, if you just, I honestly don't know what the recipe is. Sorry, Chandler, but it was a really simple, probably 100% German Pilsner malt with Tettnanger at 60, 30, and 15, pretty typical, and fermented with 029 Kolsch yeast.
Yeah, and the recipe for the 6-pint Citra Murillo. I think, it's very simple. It's mostly pale ale malt, some honey malt, and Citra and Amarillo hops. But I think we'll make the finer points of the recipe a Patreon reward for next month. Since this didn't end up as an experiment or anything, we'll drop it into the Patreon supporters.
All right, we have 2 more questions, one of which comes from Adam.
Sure. He says he bottles all his beer, has good success with Safel USO5, but he just switched to White Labs 002. He says the web is full of stories of beers bottled with 002 and attenuating too low and becoming cidery. He says it puzzles him because the yeast is traditionally used in cask ales where sugar is added to the cask. Is there anything he can do to prevent negative things that other brewers seem to encounter in the bottle conditioning process?
Maybe I'm in a different boat here, right? But I've never seen these bad stories that Adam's bringing up about 002 attenuating too low in the bottle and becoming cidery. Now, albeit I don't know if I've ever bottle conditioned a beer that I fermented with 002. Perhaps if I think about it, my very first beer I ever made might actually have been fermented with the Fuller strain. But I don't feel like I have what it takes to answer this question too well, just because I've never experienced 002 in my experience is kind of like a moderate attenuating yeast. It doesn't really drop as low as say something like 090 or even USO5. So why it would attenuate more once it's bottled and then becomes cidery, I really don't know.
So there's 2 points I want to make here. One is that if you search a yeast strain and then a potential problem or question, you're going to find forum reports on every yeast strain, whether it's, White Lab 090, which we've experienced, I think both the two of us, as being one of the most reliable, rock solid yeasts around. If you look up 090 and stalled in a Google search, you're going to find forum posts and Reddit posts and whatever about somebody's 090 beer that stalled out or exploded in bottles or whatever.
Yeah, right. That's what I sort of call the Yelp effect, right? People are going to go, the people who are most likely to go and leave a review are people who had a really bad experience at a restaurant or in this case, a yeast. And so there seems to be at least, and this is just based on observation. There seems to be this kind of tendency that if you go and Google WLP002 problems, you're going to find those problems. So that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly haven't, gone on Homebrew Talk or Reddit or whatever and talked about, made a post for every one of the 50 090 batches that went swimmingly.
Yeah, right.
So there's, I just don't know that that's a good metric to know if something is a problem. That said, if there is a real effect here, one of the things I will say is that 002 is known for being a lower attenuating yeast. So if a brewer had any sort of issue with contamination or bacteria or anything like that, it would leave more food, more fermentable potential sugars that might be able to be further fermented by, Brettanomyces or, various bacteria. So in that sense, a drier yeast might be lower risk, from a bottle conditioning standpoint, because it's going to leave less.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that. If it's not the yeast, and you're still, if these attenuation issues and the cidery character isn't the yeast, chances are there's some form of a contamination. And, but you know what, Adam, I don't know if it sounds like you're asking for, prevention techniques. But if you're not experiencing this, then I guess maybe you have nothing to worry about. Just make sure that you're cleaning your stuff really well and sanitizing it, using it a high quality sanitizer, iota 4 or Star San, something like that, and you should be good to go.
Of course, the number one recommendation with any bottle conditioning question is always going to be just start kegging.
Yeah, that's not a bad point, actually. And just make sure you sanitize your kegs as well. Well, there's one more question I've actually, this is just I'm not going to attach a name to it because I've been asked this question a bunch since we started the podcast, and it has to do with sound quality and what we're recording into. And there are other gearheads out there who are also homebrewers, and so just to kind of fulfill their curiosity, I'll kind of quickly go over what we've done here. Anyone who listens to the podcast is probably aware that there is a sound quality difference between me speaking from my office/studio here in Fresno, California, and the other contributors who come on the show. A part of the thing is that I've got a history of recording music. Mostly, I've been writing music since I was a late teenager, and recording it on my computer. So I already have stuff set up to sound at least decent. Now, for people who want to know my gear, I'm speaking into a Shure SM7B microphone right now that gets run into what's called a cloud lifter, which amps up the gain by itself because the SM7B, I believe, is an underpowered microphone. And then I run that into a Focusrite 2i2, just a kind of an inexpensive but fairly decent quality audio interface that then goes into an iMac that I have on my computer that I'm sitting and looking at right now. And then that I just record into GarageBand. That it's built in on this computer and it works relatively well. Now, I could sit here and record my voice alone as the day is long, but nobody wants to hear that. It's, I'd probably get really boring, start talking too fast, stuff like that. So what we use is Skype to have other contributors phone in at the same time. The reason we don't have multiple contributors on at the same time is that getting that many people on Skype and then being able to have them all line up and sound right and not talk over each other it's basically impossible. And so what we've kind of just settled on is we'll have one contributor on with me every time we do a show and try to keep it conversational. Those contributors all have just a completely different set of recording equipment that I've gathered over the years, different microphones and audio interfaces and stuff like that they're using. We call through Skype, and then I use a weird round kind of wraparound way of recording the Skype conversation into my audio recording stuff, the GarageBand here. And then they also record on their end, themselves alone. They send that to me. And if it doesn't sound good, I just use the Skype audio. If it sounds okay, I use their audio that I go in and edit to hopefully get as close to possible to all of the levels that I'm recording. So I'm not going to go over all of the equipment they've got. They're all different types of condenser microphones and dynamic microphones and stuff like that. And we're basically to the point where it works, but we are going to continue working toward building that up. And one way we can do that is through your support, because this stuff don't come cheap. Trust me. So hopefully that satiates the curiosity of the people out there who've been asking about our sound quality and the differences between us, between myself and the other people who come on the show, as well as just we've gotten a lot of actually really good feedback about the way I sound. And I do appreciate that. It's not as easy as some people might think. So I think that's it. We've got a whole other set of questions. This show's been longer than most of them. People want their questions answered, and we are going to do that in another episode in the future. Just if you have any questions you want answered on these Brü A episodes, you can email me directly at marshall@brulosophy.com, or you can email whatever other contributor you want at their first name at brulosophy.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter and ask your questions there as well. If you like what we're doing and you want more of it, head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can help us out. And don't forget to check out the rewards you can get for supporting us at patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back soon with the next episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through no middleman no more.